We're joined by Kimon Boyiatjis, Director at Trident Capital. That's for some more Investment 360. Kimon, thanks very much for your time. We know that over the last 4 months, equities have been your preferred asset class. You've always been an advocate for inflation linkers or inflation-linked bonds. Is that still the status quo in your portfolio?
Yes, Bronwyn, when I look at inflation-linked bonds, for me they're a cornerstone of a portfolio. And for one very simple reason, I mean, the reason we invest in anything is to get a real return over time. And it's a single asset class. It's the only single asset class that gives you what you really trying to is the objective of any portfolio. So one would be remiss in not having them in. And for me, an underweight position in inflation linkers is close to 10%. And I'm still sticking to 20% as an investment in a portfolio. I think it makes a lot of sense to have one. In fact, every home should have one.
Wayne, what do you think about this strategy?
I'm very positive on inflation-linked bonds.
A 20% exposure to inflation-linked bonds.
Look, by and large, our exposure is not. There's a big influence on our exposure is what mandate our clients give us. But we've got very, very large inflation-linked bond exposures, and within our, let's call it our managed funds, our general discretion funds, we're way above the average competitor, but we haven't got 20%. I mean, we're sitting 7-8%, which is still a big position, but we're not at the 20. Maybe we haven't crossed the Rubicon yet. And no.
Well, there we go. Wayne hasn't crossed the Rubicon. Let's move on to your insurance policy in your portfolios, and that is gold exposure. Currently sitting around 5 to 7%. You've often said on this show you see gold as a currency, and perhaps you can just highlight the fact that this is an insurance policy at the end of the day, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a currency diversification tool, and for me, I'm talking physical gold. I don't have any exposure to gold shares per se. We got rid of that towards I think the third quarter of last year. And for me, I'm very comfortable to have gold in the portfolio. One should never have less than 5%. It's, as I said earlier, I think it's an insurance policy for times of crisis, and I do think that I'd rather have an ounce of gold now in a portfolio than $100 and look forward in 100 years and see what it'll be worth.
Yeah, I mean, we've also got a very big gold exposure. Within your equity, Kimon, what do you fancy? What sectors do you think are fairly valued, or where do you think the growth in earnings is going to come from?
Our preferred play has been the resource side. Anglo's has been, of all the resource stocks, the diversified miner that we do prefer, and we got in again in the third quarter of last year quite aggressively. I think Billiton is one of the more favoured plays, but I don't like to go into an area where there's a crowded play per se. So for me, the value was in Anglo's. They're delivering. I think their strategy is good. I think their exposure globally is great. It's not just a South African company. It's a global mining company that's very well diversified. And I think that within their own portfolio of resources, again, it's well diversified. So I don't think you're going to get any shocks to the system. Of course, BHP Billiton's got the oil exposure, which Anglo's doesn't. But
Kimon,
again,
before we move off Anglo-American, I've chatted to a number of fund managers over the last couple of months, and Anglo-American has been a very familiar tune coming through over and over again. Is this not something of a crowded trade right now?
I think if you look at the portfolios, the overweight position, and maybe Wayne will bear me out there, I think BHP is a big exposure on balance in South African equity portfolios. And there's another reason, before Wayne answers me, I might be wrong there, but I do think Anglo's is underweight relative to BHP. But there's another reason, and that's for the corporate play that's possibly out there with Xstrata. And I think Anglo's is a takeover target. Somewhere, and if it's not by Xstrata, it's going to be somebody else. So I think they could be in the firing line there, and again, that's very supportive of the share price.
Well, when you were nodding there, so is Anglo's underweight compared to BHP Billiton?
No, Anglo's, yes. Look, it all depends what index you measure against, but that's quite frankly academic exercise. Fund managers are quite significantly more overweight Billiton than what they are in Anglo's. If I'm not mistaken, it's Billiton, Sasol, Anglo's are the three big mining sector overweights.
Billiton, Sasol,
Anglo's. Yeah. But Anglo's has got some very good assets going for them, but they're struggling on the platinum side. What's the answer for not just Amplats? What's the answer for all platinum? Because they're just not getting the volume through, and costs are going through the roof, and the margins are just being squeezed. What's the answer for the platinum companies?
Kimon, he's not asking me, he's asking you.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a ready fix for that, Wayne. I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. I don't know what the ready fix is. Let's face it, platinum is concentrated in Southern Africa. So it might be a regional problem, and I think we're going to have costs will carry on rising. I think we will see strikes if they don't get greater increases, and I think that could be one of the problems that they're going to face on that front. And again, for me, it is purely regional. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 85% of global platinum supply comes from South Africa and effectively Zimbabwe, really. And, you know, well, maybe that's where the problem lies. And they've got concentration risks, certainly. I don't know what the answer is, though.
Kimon, we've got budget fever in the studio. Obviously, tomorrow we've got the South African budget, and all eyes on what Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan will be putting on the table. Are you expecting anything from your perspective?
I think the Department of Finance is clearly my favourite department in, in the government. I think they've done a brilliant job over the last decade or so and longer. I think they signal quite clearly if there are going to be any dramatic changes. I think they've got a good relationship with the market in general. Again, I think they might have some budget overruns, funny enough. I think they might surprise on the upside. They might be minuscule, but I do think that they manage the finances of the country particularly well. I think our problems lie further down the chain. Once those monies are allocated to different departments, that's where we run into problems. Just to give an idea where we have a problem in South Africa, if you look at education, for example, as a percentage of GDP, we spend more money than virtually any other country in the world on education. Now, if you go and have a look, what have we achieved by doing that? Virtually nothing. In fact, we're quite embarrassingly low on the world rankings in terms of education. Maths and science, I think we rank 123rd out of 133 countries, if not lower than that. So what happens once the money has been allocated to those departments, for me, is the political problem going forward. But when it comes to the budgets, I think we're going to get a good budget as expected. I think they managed to put in a few nice surprises on the outside. And I think one thing we might see, they might come to the market for greater bond issuance, but they've been managing that particularly well. And I think foreign investors have been interested in South African bonds for the decent yield that we're giving, and the stability, quite frankly.